Listen, what I'm about to tell you. I still can't sleep at night thinking about it. Look, I've been a ranger for 12 years, right? 12 freaking years walking these woods, and I thought I'd seen everything. Bears tearing through campsites, idiots getting lost without water, the usual stuff. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I found that morning out near Black Creek. It was one of those cold October mornings where your breath just hangs in the air, you know? I was doing my usual sweep of the back trails, the ones nobody really uses except maybe some hunters during season. That's when I spotted it, this old hunting cabin tucked back in the trees. Now, abandoned cabins aren't weird out here, but something felt off immediately. The door wasn't broken down or anything. It was just slightly open, like someone had been there recently and didn't bother locking up. My gut was screaming at me not to go in, but that's literally my job, right? So I pushed the door open, and man, the smell hit me first. Not like death or anything, but that stale air smell, like someone had been living there without opening windows. That's when I knew this wasn't just some empty shack. The moment I stepped inside, every hair on my body stood up. I'm telling you, it was like walking into someone's twisted little spy headquarters or something. There was this expensive telescope, like really expensive, probably $2,000 at least, set up right by the window, aimed downhill toward the valley. Who the hell brings equipment like that to an abandoned cabin? I walked over to check what they were looking at, and that's when I saw the map on the wall. It was a topographic map of our entire sector, covered in these red circles and notes. Some spots were marked patrol route, others said blind spot, and there were times written next to them, like 0600, 1400, 2200. They'd been watching us, studying our patterns. My hands started shaking at that point, not gonna lie. I radioed back to headquarters, told them I had something weird, but I wanted to check it out more before calling in the cavalry. Stupid, I know. Should have called for backup right then. But I kept looking around, and that's when I found the wallpaper roll. What I saw next made my blood run colder than that October morning ever could. It wasn't wallpaper. It was photos. Dozens and dozens of photographs, all printed out and taped together like some insane timeline. And they were all of the same place, this little farmhouse about 3 miles from where I was standing. I knew that house. Everyone around here knows Mrs. Vance's place. She's this sweet old lady, maybe 70 years old, lives by herself since her husband died 5 years ago. We check on her sometimes during our patrols, make sure she's doing okay. These photos, though, they weren't just casual snapshots. These were surveillance photos taken over months. I could see the dates in the corners. Some went back almost a full year. Spring photos showing her garden, summer ones with her hanging laundry, fall pictures of her checking her mailbox. Whoever took these had been watching her for a long time, documenting her every move, her whole routine. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept unrolling more of this nightmare, and the photos got more detailed, closer. Some were taken through windows at night, and you could see her inside watching TV, reading, just living her life with no idea someone was out there in the dark. Then I found the last photo, and I swear to God, I almost threw up right there. The final picture was taken with night vision. You could tell by that greenish glow everything has. It showed the back door of Mrs. Vance's house, and it was busted open. The timestamp in the corner said 2:15 a.m. from the night before. Last night, less than 24 hours ago. There was a handwritten note taped below it, and I still remember every word. Package secured. Awaiting transfer during 0400 window. Package. They called her a package, like she was cargo or something. And that 0400 window part, that's when our night patrol switches over, when there's about a 45-minute gap in coverage for this area. Whoever wrote this knew our schedules down to the minute. They'd planned this whole thing knowing exactly when they could move without us seeing. I grabbed my radio and called it in as an emergency, told them we needed units at the Vance residence immediately. My supervisor asked if I was sure, and I just screamed into that radio that Mrs. Vance had been kidnapped and we needed everyone there now. I ran out of that cabin and jumped in my truck, flying down those mountain roads faster than I've ever driven in my life. The 20-minute drive to her house felt like 20 hours. I kept trying to call her landline. She doesn't have a cell phone, never wanted one, but it just rang and rang and rang. State police were on their way, but I was closer, and I couldn't just sit there waiting. When I pulled up to her property, everything looked normal at first. Her car was in the driveway, the front porch light was on like always. But when I got to that back door, the one from the photo, it was hanging half off its hinges. Someone had kicked it in hard. I drew my service weapon, First time I've ever had to do that for real, and went inside calling her name. "Mrs. Vance, it's Ranger Green. Are you here?" Nothing. The house was completely silent except for this weird beeping sound coming from the kitchen. Her coffee maker was still on from that morning, pot burned dry. That's what the beeping was. There were signs of a struggle in the living room. A lamp knocked over, her reading glasses crushed on the floor. I cleared every room, but she wasn't there. She was just gone. By the time backup arrived 15 minutes later, I was sitting on her front porch trying not to completely lose it. They found her 3 days later, and what she told us still gives me nightmares. She was alive, thank God, found at a rest stop about 200 miles away, confused and dehydrated but physically okay. When the detectives interviewed her, she said she woke up that night to someone standing over her bed, wearing a ski mask. They drugged her with something, and she doesn't remember much after that until she woke up in the back of a van. She could hear at least 2 people talking about delivery times and the buyer in Pennsylvania. Apparently there's this whole network, and I swear I'm not making this up, that targets elderly people living alone in rural areas. They surveil them for months, learn everything about them, then kidnap them to steal their identities for fraud schemes, or worse, traffic them to people who exploit vulnerable seniors. The FBI got involved, found that cabin had been used as a surveillance post for multiple victims across 3 states. They caught 2 guys from the photo's metadata, but there are more out there. Mrs. Vance lives with her daughter now, can't stand being alone anymore. And me? I check every abandoned building I find with a whole different level of paranoia. Because now I know that someone could be out there, watching, waiting, studying their next victim. And the scariest part, if I'd done my patrol route even 1 day later, we might never have found her alive. That's what keeps me up at night, man. That's what really gets me. I need you to understand something right now. What I found in that house wasn't just disturbing. It was evil. Alright, so I'm a property assessor, been doing this job for like 23 years now, right? I go into houses all day long, empty ones, furnished ones, foreclosures, new builds, you name it. It's boring as hell most of the time, measuring rooms, checking foundations, taking pictures for the county tax records. That's it. But last month I got assigned this new luxury subdivision outside Austin. One of those places where every house looks like it belongs in a magazine. They needed assessments done on the model homes before the grand opening, and I got Unit 47B. From the outside, this place was gorgeous, modern design, perfectly landscaped, probably worth close to $1 million. I grabbed my clipboard and toolkit, unlocked the front door with the realtor's code, and stepped inside. Immediately something felt weird, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The house was too perfect, you know what I mean? Like I've seen plenty of staged homes, but this was different. Everything was positioned exactly right, not a single thing out of place. The furniture looked expensive but generic, like it came from some catalog. I started doing my walkthrough, taking measurements, and that's when the little details started adding up to something really wrong. The kitchen is where my gut first told me to get the hell out, but I didn't listen. So I walk into this kitchen, and it's beautiful, marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, the whole 9 yards. But then I open the fridge to check if it's working properly, and it's completely stocked. Now that's not totally weird for a model home. Sometimes they'll put fake food in there for staging. Except this wasn't fake. It was real groceries, all generic brands, arranged in perfect rows like someone had OCD or something. Every label faced forward. The milk was dated from 3 days ago. There were eggs, cheese, sandwich meat, all fresh. Who stocks a model home with real perishable food? I checked the cabinets and found the same thing. Canned goods, pasta, cereal, all lined up like soldiers. No dust anywhere, and I mean anywhere. I run my finger along the top of the door frames, nothing. These houses have been sitting here for at least 2 months according to my paperwork, but this place looked like someone had just cleaned it that morning. The bathroom had fresh towels, fancy soap still wrapped in plastic. The beds were made with hospital corners, so tight you could bounce a quarter off them. It felt more like a display in a furniture store than an actual home, but something about it was really creeping me out. When I found the access panel to the attic, that's when everything changed for me forever. I was in the hallway doing my measurements when I noticed the attic access hatch was slightly crooked, like someone had opened it recently and didn't put it back quite right. Part of my job is checking the attic insulation and structure, so I grabbed my ladder from the truck and climbed up. The second I pushed that panel open, I heard this weird humming sound, like industrial equipment running. That's not normal for a residential house, especially not a brand new one. I pulled myself up into the attic, turned on my flashlight, and saw what was making that noise. There was this massive air conditioning unit up there, commercial grade, the kind you'd see in a hospital or a lab. It was running full blast, pumping cold air through modified ventilation ducts that went down through the walls. But here's the thing, those ducts didn't go to the main house. They were routed through the ceiling, down through a wall cavity, and into the garage. I followed the ductwork as best I could from up there, marking where it went on my assessment sheet. Something told me I needed to check that garage more carefully. I climbed back down, went outside, and walked into the garage through the side door. It looked normal at first, empty, clean concrete floor, fresh paint on the walls. But I noticed there was a section on the far wall that looked newer than the rest. The concrete in that corner wasn't just new, it was hiding something they didn't want anyone to find. I tapped on different parts of the garage floor with my hammer, checking for foundation issues like I always do. Most of it sounded normal, but that corner section sounded different, more hollow somehow, and the concrete was definitely fresher than the rest. You could see where they'd tried to match the color, but didn't quite get it right. There were ventilation grates embedded in this newer section, which made no sense because garage floors don't need vents. I got down on my hands and knees and looked through one of those grates with my flashlight. I could see down into some kind of sealed room below, maybe 8 by 10 feet. And I could feel that cold air blowing up from the industrial AC unit I'd seen in the attic. My hands were shaking at this point, but I had to know what was down there. I found a small access panel behind some drywall that had been cut and replaced. You could see the fresh joint compound. I pulled it open and looked inside with my flashlight. There was a metal chair bolted to the concrete floor, the kind you'd see in an interrogation room or something. But what made my blood run cold were the restraints, surgical-grade handcuffs attached to the arms and legs of that chair. Not regular handcuffs like police use, but medical restraints with padding, the kind designed for long-term use. I nearly dropped my flashlight when I saw that. Then I saw the note, and I realized this wasn't just one isolated incident. It was part of something much bigger. Taped to the back of that chair was a piece of paper, protected in a plastic sleeve like someone wanted to preserve it. I had to reach down through that access panel to grab it, almost fell through trying to get it. When I finally pulled it up and read it, I swear my heart stopped. It said, "This unit served its purpose. New staging location approved in Phase 3. Staging location. Phase 3. Like this was some kind of operation, like there were multiple sites. I stood there in that garage for probably 5 minutes just staring at those words, trying to process what I was looking at. This wasn't a model home. It was a holding facility, a place to keep people prisoner, to interrogate them, or God knows what else. That AC unit was there to keep the space below a specific temperature, probably to slow decomposition or prevent heat signatures from thermal cameras. The fresh food in the fridge meant someone had been here recently, maintaining the place. All that perfection upstairs was a cover, a facade to make everything look normal if anyone came by. I immediately called 911, told them I'd found evidence of kidnapping, or worse, at this address. The dispatcher seemed skeptical at first, probably thought I was some crazy person, but when I described that room and the restraints, her whole tone changed. She told me to get out of the house immediately and wait for police outside. The FBI found 3 more houses in that subdivision with the same setup, and what they told me still keeps me up every single night. Turns out I'd stumbled onto a trafficking operation that had been running for at least 2 years. The FBI task force that took over found 2 more houses in that same development with identical hidden rooms, plus another one in a subdivision 40 miles away. They were all model homes that never officially went on the market, bought through shell companies and used as what they called processing centers. They'd bring victims there, hold them for a few days, do whatever they needed to do, then move them somewhere else. The generic food, the perfect staging, it was all designed to look normal if anyone did a walkthrough. Local cops had even been by these places for security checks and never noticed anything wrong. The note I found mentioned Phase 3, and according to the feds, that meant they were expanding operations into other cities. They arrested 4 people connected to the properties, but the investigation is still ongoing. They told me I probably saved lives by finding that room when I did, but honestly, I can't shake the feeling that I could have found it sooner if I'd been more observant on previous jobs. Now every time I go into an empty house, I'm looking for things that are too perfect, too clean, too staged. I check every attic, every basement, every weird corner I can find. Because I know now that monsters don't just hide in dark alleys. They hide in plain sight, in beautiful houses in nice neighborhoods, and they're counting on people like me to just do our jobs and not ask questions. Well, I'm done not asking questions. I'm done just measuring rooms and moving on. Never again, man. Never again. Tentar novameni. I'm about to tell you how I discovered that someone was weaponizing silence and using it to hunt cops in my county. So I've been a 911 dispatcher for Butte County for almost 8 years now, and let me tell you, this job will mess with your head sometimes. You're sitting there with your headset on, and you're literally the lifeline between someone in danger and the help they need. Every second counts, right? But about 6 months ago, I started noticing something really strange happening on our radio frequencies, specifically in the mountain areas along Highway 70. That stretch of road is already notorious for bad cell reception. It's all canyons and ridges, signal just dies out there. We've had issues before, but this was different. Whenever we'd get a critical emergency call from that area, I'm talking serious stuff like major car accidents, armed robberies, officer down situations, our radio communications would just fall apart. Like complete static. We couldn't dispatch backup, couldn't coordinate response teams, couldn't even maintain contact with units already en route. At first, I thought it was just our equipment acting up or maybe some weird atmospheric thing. My supervisor kept saying it was probably solar flares or something. But the thing is, it only happened during emergencies in that specific zone, and always at the worst possible time. That's not a coincidence, that's a pattern. And patterns mean someone's doing something deliberately. The night Deputy Rourke disappeared is when I knew for sure this wasn't just technical difficulties. Someone was hunting us. It was a Tuesday evening, around 10:45 p.m., when Deputy John Rourke called in a traffic stop on Highway 70, mile marker 34. Routine stuff, just a sedan with a broken taillight. He ran the plates, everything checked out normal, and he approached the vehicle. We could hear everything clearly at first. Him asking for license and registration, the driver responding, all standard procedure. Then suddenly his voice changed, got urgent real fast. He said something like, show me your hands now. And we heard scuffling, maybe shouting from multiple voices. I immediately tried to dispatch backup and put out an officer needs assistance call, but the second I switched frequencies to alert other units, we got hit with this wall of static. Not just regular interference. This was intense, constant, like someone turned on a white noise machine directly into our system. I was screaming into my headset trying to reach anyone, but nothing was getting through. My supervisor ran over and tried using our backup radio system, same thing. Complete communications blackout. We couldn't reach any units, couldn't coordinate anything. It lasted for almost 12 minutes, which doesn't sound like much, but when an officer's in trouble, 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours. When the static finally cleared, and we got units out there, Deputy Rourke's patrol car was empty. Door open, lights still flashing, his radio ripped out and smashed on the ground. No sign of him anywhere. I spent the next 3 days barely sleeping, going through every call log and radio recording, and that's when I found the proof. After Rourke vanished, I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about all those other incidents over the past 6 months, at least 7 or 8 times where we'd lost communications during critical calls in that area. Some of those calls ended with officers injured, witnesses disappearing before backup arrived, evidence getting destroyed or stolen. The official explanation was always technical issues or dead zones, but I wasn't buying it anymore. So I started pulling data, going through every dispatch log, every radio frequency report, every timestamp I could get my hands on. I'm talking spreadsheets, charts, the whole obsessive investigation thing. My boyfriend thought I was losing it, staying up until 3 in the morning with papers spread all over our apartment. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The static interference wasn't random at all. It was synchronized with our patrol schedules. Like, perfectly timed. Our deputies follow predictable routes, especially on night shifts, because there's only so many roads to patrol in those mountains. Whoever was causing this interference knew exactly when and where our officers would be. They were tracking our movements somehow, probably monitoring our dispatch frequencies, and then triggering that static at the exact moment when it would cause maximum chaos and delay backup response. This was planned, coordinated, and it meant someone had been studying us for months. When I brought my findings to the sheriff's department, they thought I was paranoid until I showed them the signal analysis. I requested a meeting with Sheriff Martinez and brought in everything I'd found, all my logs, my timeline charts, the correlation between the static events and patrol routes. At first, he was polite but skeptical, gave me that look like, okay, you've been working too hard, maybe take some time off. But I insisted he look at the data, so he called in our communications tech specialist, this guy named Dale who handles all our radio equipment. I explained my theory that someone was actively jamming our frequencies during specific incidents, and Dale initially said that was unlikely because you'd need pretty sophisticated equipment to do that. But then I showed him something I'd found using this old signal analysis software that my cousin who's in the military had sent me. I'd pulled the audio recordings from those static events and ran them through the program, and it showed that the interference wasn't natural. It had a signature pattern, like a specific frequency being broadcast at high power. Dale's face went totally white when he saw it. He said, "Holy shit, this is a portable repeater signal, probably military grade." Turns out these devices are designed to override radio communications by flooding the frequency with noise. They're illegal as hell for civilians to own, and they're expensive, which meant whoever was using them had resources and training. The FBI raid 3 weeks later uncovered something so organized and calculated that it still gives me chills to think about. Once we confirmed someone was jamming our communications, the FBI got involved immediately. They brought in their tech team and started tracking signal sources using triangulation equipment. It took them about 2 weeks, but they finally pinpointed 3 locations where the jamming signals had originated, all on high ground overlooking Highway 70, perfect spots to monitor traffic and radio frequencies. When they raided those locations, they found equipment that blew everyone's minds. We're talking commercial-grade radio jammers, portable power generators, laptops running frequency scanning software, and detailed schedules of our patrol routes going back almost a year. They'd been watching us, learning our patterns, documenting everything. But here's the really terrifying part. They also found records of targets. Turns out this was part of a larger criminal network operating across 3 counties. They'd target officers who were alone in dead zones, jam the communications so backup couldn't respond quickly, then ambush them. Sometimes they'd just rob them for weapons and equipment, but other times they'd kidnap officers to get information about evidence lockers or witness protection details. Deputy Rourke's name was on that list. They found him 4 days after the raid, alive thank God, being held in an abandoned mining facility about 60 miles away. He'd been interrogated about ongoing investigations and beaten pretty badly, but he survived. Now every time I sit down at my dispatch console, I'm listening for things that most people would never even notice. And I'll never stop. 7 people were arrested in connection with this whole operation, including a former military communications specialist who'd been dishonorably discharged and was apparently the mastermind behind the jamming system. The FBI told us this network had been operating in rural counties across California, Oregon, and Nevada, specifically targeting areas with known communication dead zones. They'd been responsible for at least 15 officer ambushes, 3 kidnappings, and God knows how many crimes that went unsolved because they could operate without fear of rapid police response. Since then, our department has completely overhauled our communication systems, installed backup satellite links, and changed our patrol patterns to be less predictable. But for me personally, everything changed. I can't just trust the equipment anymore. Every time there's static on the line now, my heart rate spikes. I'm constantly monitoring signal strength, frequency anomalies, anything that seems off. My coworkers joke that I've become paranoid, but they weren't the one who sat there helpless while Deputy Rourke was being taken and couldn't do a damn thing to help him. I save every recording now, analyze patterns in my spare time, and I've even started teaching other dispatchers what to look for. Because the scariest thing I learned from all this is that silence can be a weapon. When you're a first responder and your radio goes dead, you're completely alone. And there are people out there who know that, who study that, and who will use it against you. So yeah, I'm paranoid now. But my paranoia might just save someone's life one day. And that's a trade I'm willing to make every single time I put on this headset. The day I realized my police chief was a murderer is the day I stopped believing in justice. Look, I've only been on the force for about 14 months, right? Fresh out of the academy, still that idealistic rookie who actually believes all that protect and serve stuff they drill into your head. I'm 24 years old, working in Hyde Park, New York, which is this quiet little town along the Hudson River where the most exciting thing that usually happens is maybe a DUI or some teenager spray painting the water tower. So when I got the call about a fatal accident on Miller's Bridge around 11 p.m. on a Thursday night, my adrenaline was pumping hard. This was my first real fatality, first time I'd have to deal with a dead body and all that comes with it. I grabbed my partner Rodriguez, and we headed out there, lights blazing. The bridge is pretty remote, barely any traffic that time of night, just woods on both sides and the river below. When we got there, we saw this black BMW SUV flipped on its roof, totally mangled, steam coming off the engine. I radioed for EMS and the fire department, but honestly I knew whoever was inside was probably gone. The whole front end was crushed against the guardrail, glass everywhere, skid marks going back maybe 50 feet. It looked like a classic case of someone going way too fast, losing control, and paying the ultimate price for it. Then Chief Harrison showed up within 5 minutes, and that's when my gut started telling me something was very wrong here. So here's the thing, Chief Harrison lives on the other side of town, at least 25 minutes away from Miller's Bridge. There's no way he should have gotten there as fast as he did, especially since we'd only called it in maybe 6-7 minutes earlier. But there he was pulling up in his personal truck, not even his patrol vehicle. He walked straight past me and Rodriguez without saying a word, went right to the SUV, looked inside at the body, and then pulled out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language was weird. Not shocked or upset like you'd expect at a fatal accident scene, more like annoyed? Maybe stressed? When he came back over to us, he had this completely calm expression and told us the victim was Ethan Sterling, 18 years old, son of Mayor Charles Sterling. My first thought was, oh man, this is going to be a huge deal, the mayor's kid dying like this. But Harrison just put his hand on my shoulder and said in this really flat voice, "Officer Kim, this is a straightforward accident. Loss of control due to excessive speed. I need you to write it up exactly like that, understood?" Something about the way he said it felt off, like he was giving me an order rather than just briefing me on the situation. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable too, kept glancing between me and the chief like he wanted to say something but didn't dare. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being told to ignore evidence, so 3 days later I went to the impound lot by myself. The accident report I filed said exactly what Harrison told me to write. Driver lost control at high speed, single vehicle accident, no suspicious circumstances. It should have been case closed, just another tragic reminder for kids to slow down. But I kept thinking about how fast the chief had arrived, how he'd immediately identified the victim without checking ID, how he'd been so insistent about the exact wording of my report. I'd seen plenty of accident scenes during my training, and something about this one bothered me. The skid marks were too short for the amount of damage to the vehicle, and the point of impact seemed weird, like the car hadn't just drifted off the road, but had suddenly swerved hard right into the guardrail. On my day off, I drove over to the county impound lot where they'd towed the SUV. I told the attendant I needed to do a follow-up inspection for my report, which wasn't technically a lie. He let me in, and I spent probably an hour going over that BMW with a flashlight, checking every detail. The tires were fairly new, good tread. The road had been dry that night. There was no reason for a loss of control unless the driver had been drunk or distracted, but the toxicology report came back clean. Ethan hadn't been drinking or on drugs. That's when I decided to check the brake system. What I found under that car made my hands shake so bad I almost dropped my flashlight. This was no accident. I'm not a mechanic, but we got basic vehicle inspection training at the academy, enough to know what brake lines are supposed to look like. I crawled under the SUV with my flashlight and started tracing the hydraulic lines from the master cylinder to the wheels. Everything looked normal at first, just typical wear and tear, a little road dirt. But then I got to the front passenger side brake line, and I saw it, a clean, precise cut about 3 inches long, almost surgical. This wasn't corrosion, wasn't damage from the crash, wasn't a manufacturing defect. Someone had deliberately sliced into that line with something sharp, probably a razor blade or a specialized cutting tool. The cut was positioned perfectly so that brake fluid would leak out slowly at first, then catastrophically once the driver really needed to stop. I felt sick to my stomach. I took probably 20 photos with my phone from every angle, documented everything. Then I sat there in the dirt under that mangled SUV for a good 10 minutes, trying to process what this meant. Ethan Sterling didn't die in an accident. Somebody murdered him, made it look like reckless driving, and my chief was covering it up. The question was why, and more importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do about it? If I went to the state police, would they even believe a rookie cop accusing his own chief of conspiracy to commit murder? When I confronted Chief Harrison in his office 2 days later, he didn't even try to deny it. and what he told me was so much worse than I imagined. I requested a private meeting with Harrison, told his secretary it was about the Sterling case. When I walked into his office with my phone full of photos, he was sitting behind his desk looking tired, like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. I didn't dance around it. I just showed him the pictures of that cut-break line and asked him point blank what the hell was going on. He looked at the photos for maybe 30 seconds without saying anything. Then he closed my phone, handed it back to me, and leaned back in his chair. "Officer Kim," he said, "did you show these to anyone else?" I told him no, not yet, and he nodded slowly. Then he said something I'll never forget as long as I live. Ethan Sterling was threatening to expose certain financial transactions that his father, the mayor, has been involved with for the past 5 years. Transactions that fund this police department, that pay your salary and mine, that keep this town's infrastructure running. The kid found some documents, got self-righteous about it, and was going to go to the press. Mayor Sterling couldn't have that, obviously, but he also couldn't just make his own son disappear. That would raise too many questions. So he arranged an accident, something clean that would look like a tragic case of teenage recklessness. We've done this before with problems we can't solve legally. In that moment, I had to choose between my career, my safety, and doing what I knew was right, and I'm still paying the price for my choice. I just stared at Harrison like he'd grown a second head. He was admitting to murder for hire, admitting to multiple cover-ups, admitting that the entire police department was basically a criminal organization masquerading as law enforcement. My mind was racing. Should I run? Should I arrest him right there? Should I play along and go straight to the FBI? Harrison must have seen the panic on my face because he stood up and walked around his desk, got real close to me, and said in this quiet voice, "You have 2 options, David. You can forget everything you found, destroy those photos, and we'll never speak of this again. You'll have a good career here, maybe even make detective in a few years. Or you can try to be a hero, go to the authorities, and I promise you that you'll either end up in a cell on fabricated charges or in an accident just like Ethan's. The mayor has connections at every level, state police, DA's office, judges. You're one rookie cop with some photos that could easily be explained away as crash damage examined by someone who doesn't know what they're looking at." I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Part of me wanted to just walk away, pretend I never saw anything, keep my head down and survive. But I kept thinking about Ethan Sterling, 18 years old, murdered by his own father for threatening to expose corruption, and how many other people had died to protect these transactions Harrison mentioned. So I looked him dead in the eye and told him I was going to the FBI. His expression didn't change, just nodded and said, "Then you're a dead man." I walked out of that office, drove straight to the federal building in Albany, and spent 6 hours giving a statement to federal agents. That was 4 months ago, and my life has been a nightmare ever since. I'm in protective custody, can't go home, can't see my family without supervision, constantly looking over my shoulder. The investigation is ongoing. They've arrested Mayor Sterling and Chief Harrison along with 4 other officers, but the trial hasn't started yet, and their lawyers are fighting everything. Meanwhile, I'm basically unemployable in law enforcement, living off witness protection stipends, wondering if I'll ever have a normal life again. But you know what? I'd make the same choice every single time, because at least when I look in the mirror, I can still recognize the person staring back at me. I found a room where a serial kidnapper was erasing women's identities before selling them, and it was the most disturbing crime scene I've ever walked into. Alright, so I'm Detective Sergeant Naomi Jones, been working homicide and missing persons for the Trenton PD for about 11 years now. I've seen some dark stuff in this job, murder scenes, domestic violence cases that'll haunt you forever, child abuse situations that make you want to quit and never look back. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found in that warehouse on Fisher Avenue. It started 3 months ago when we got reports of 3 women going missing within a 6-week span, all from the Trenton area. These weren't random disappearances either. They fit a very specific pattern. All 3 were middle-aged women, between 45 and 58 years old, living alone after divorces or the deaths of their husbands. They kept predictable routines, same grocery store every week, same walking routes, same everything. The kind of people who wouldn't be missed right away because they didn't have close family checking on them daily. When I started digging into the cases, I noticed something that made my detective instincts go crazy. All 3 had been approached by the same charity volunteer in the weeks before they vanished. Security footage from a supermarket showed this guy, late 30s, average build, talking to one of the victims about donating to a veterans organization. That became my lead. After weeks of investigating, I finally tracked the suspect to a commercial warehouse, but what I found inside made me question everything I thought I knew about criminal psychology. We identified the suspect as Silas Crane, 37 years old, with a history of fraud and identity theft, but nothing violent on his record. When we tracked down his current address, it led to a residential property, but neighbors said they barely saw him there. That's when I started looking at his financial records and found monthly payments to a storage and warehouse facility on the industrial side of town. I got a warrant, assembled a tactical team because we didn't know what we were walking into, and we hit that location on a Tuesday morning around 6 a.m. The building was one of those old brick warehouses, probably used to store manufacturing equipment back in the day, mostly abandoned now except for a few small businesses. Crane's unit was in the back corner, bay number 17. We breached the door expecting maybe to find evidence, maybe even bodies, but what we actually found was so bizarre that the first officer through the door just stopped and said, "What the hell am I looking at?" The main area of the warehouse was normal, some boxes, filing cabinets, nothing unusual. But there was a door at the back that led to a climate-controlled room, and that's where everything got really disturbing. The room was set up like some kind of twisted museum exhibit, with track lighting and everything perfectly organized. And that's when I saw the mannequins. There were 3 mannequins positioned in that room, and each one was dressed exactly like one of our missing women, down to the jewelry and shoes. I've worked hundreds of cases, but I've never felt my skin crawl the way it did when I walked into that room. These weren't just regular store mannequins. They were realistic ones, the kind you'd see in high-end boutiques, with detailed faces and real human hair wigs. And each one was dressed in an exact replica of what our victims had been wearing when they disappeared. The first mannequin had on a blue cardigan, khaki pants, and white sneakers, exactly what Patricia Holbrook had been wearing according to her neighbor's statement. The second wore a floral dress and carried a brown purse. That was Denise Martinez's outfit from the supermarket footage. The third had jeans, a gray sweater, and those specific New Balance running shoes, Linda Kowalski's daily walking clothes. But here's what really messed me up. The details were perfect. We're talking the same brand of watch, the same style of reading glasses hanging from a chain, even the same small coffee stain on Patricia's cardigan that her neighbor had mentioned. Whoever did this had been studying these women intensely, documenting every detail of their lives. Standing in front of each mannequin was a wall completely covered in broken mirrors, hundreds of pieces of shattered glass arranged in this chaotic pattern. But when you stood where the mannequin was positioned, all those broken fragments reflected back a single image, the mannequin itself, fractured into 1,000 pieces. Then I found Crane's journal, and what I read in those pages explained a psychological torture method I'd never even imagined existed. My forensics team started cataloging everything while I looked for any clue about where the actual victims might be. That's when I found a leather-bound journal on a bookshelf near the back wall. The handwriting was neat, methodical, almost clinical in its precision. Crane had documented everything: how he selected his targets, how he approached them, how he gained their trust over several weeks before finally abducting them. But the part that made my blood run cold was his explanation of what he did with them before selling them to his clients. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like, "They fear what they lose. I give them time to see themselves as lost. The past self stays here, looking at the broken reflection." He would bring the women to this room, keep them restrained in a separate location I hadn't found yet, and force them to watch videos of these mannequins for hours every day. He'd make them watch their own image, their own identity, frozen and trapped in this museum, while he slowly broke down their sense of self. The broken mirrors were part of it. He wanted them to see themselves as fragmented, destroyed, no longer whole. It was a form of psychological torture designed to cause complete dissociation from their own identities. Once they were broken enough, once they'd given up any sense of who they were, he'd deliver them as merchandise to human trafficking networks. They'd be so psychologically damaged that they wouldn't even try to escape or identify themselves to authorities. We found the holding location 2 days later, and what those women told us about their captivity still gives me nightmares every single night. Based on Crane's journal entries and some cryptic references to the preparation facility, we tracked down a second property he'd been renting under a fake name, a farmhouse about 40 miles outside Trenton in a rural area where nobody would hear screaming. When we raided it, We found all 3 women alive but in horrific psychological condition. They were being held in separate rooms, each with a laptop showing a live feed of their respective mannequin in that warehouse museum. They'd been watching themselves, or rather these frozen representations of themselves, for weeks. Patricia had been there the longest, almost 7 weeks, and she could barely speak when we found her. She kept saying, "That's not me anymore, that's not me," over and over. The psychological damage was severe. They'd been fed regularly, kept physically healthy, but mentally they'd been tortured in ways that didn't leave physical scars. Crane had recorded everything, had notes about which women were ready for transfer and which needed more time. We arrested him at his residential property about 6 hours after we found the women. He didn't resist, didn't seem surprised, just asked if we'd appreciated the artistry of his work. The sick bastard thought he was some kind of artist, thought he was creating something meaningful by destroying these women's identities before handing them over to traffickers. The trial's coming up in 3 months, and the prosecutors are confident they've got enough for multiple life sentences. But you know what keeps me up at night? The fact that his records showed he'd been doing this for at least 4 years before we caught him. Now I check on those survivors every few weeks, and I've learned that some wounds are invisible but never really heal, and some monsters were the face of ordinary men. Patricia, Denise, and Linda are all in intensive therapy, trying to rebuild their sense of self after what Crane did to them. It's been 8 months since we rescued them, and the progress is slow. Patricia still has moments where she dissociates, where she looks in a mirror and doesn't recognize her own face. Denise can't stand being alone in a room for more than a few minutes before she starts panicking. Linda has made the most progress, but she told me last month that she still sees that mannequin in her dreams, dressed in her clothes, staring back at her from those broken mirrors. The FBI got involved because they found evidence that Crane was part of a larger trafficking network operating across 5 states, specifically targeting isolated middle-aged women, because they're less likely to be immediately missed, and because society tends to overlook them. That breaks my heart in ways I can't even express. These women were invisible to the world, and predators like Crane exploited that invisibility. We found evidence of at least 6 other victims who'd gone through his preparation process before being sold, but we haven't been able to locate them yet. That warehouse on Fisher Avenue has been cleared out now, all the evidence tagged and stored, but sometimes I still drive by there on my way home, and I think about what happened in that climate-controlled room. I think about how evil doesn't always look like monsters. Sometimes it looks like an ordinary guy who volunteers for charities and has a neat handwriting. And I think about all the other women out there who live predictable, isolated lives, who nobody would miss right away if they vanished. I can't save them all, but I sure as hell am going to try. Because nobody deserves to have their identity erased, to become merchandise, to be reduced to a mannequin in someone's twisted museum. Nobody. I walked into what I thought was evidence of a crime, but I was actually walking into a trap designed to study me. And I had no idea how deep this went. So my name's Robert Vance. I'm a private investigator out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Been doing this for about 16 years now. I mostly handle fraud cases, insurance scams, workers' comp investigations, corporate embezzlement, that kind of stuff. Not glamorous work like you see on TV. Mostly just sitting in cars with a camera waiting for someone to do something stupid. About 2 months ago, I got this anonymous email to my business account, claimed there was a major money laundering operation running out of an abandoned textile factory on the east side of town. The email had just enough specific details to seem legit. Building address, mention of late-night activity, even some grainy photos of people carrying duffel bags in and out. Now normally I'm pretty skeptical of anonymous tips because 9 times out of 10 they're bogus or someone trying to get revenge on an ex or whatever. But this one felt different, more professional somehow. The factory they mentioned had been closed for like 8 years, totally abandoned, perfect spot for illegal activity. I did some preliminary research, drove by a few times during the day, and the place did look suspicious. No for sale signs, no development plans, but the property taxes were being paid by some LLC I couldn't trace. That was enough to get my interest. I figured if there was something real going on, I could document it and take it to the cops, maybe even get a nice finder's fee from the DA's office. So I planned to go in at night, just do some reconnaissance, take photos, get out clean. The night I broke into that factory, everything seemed normal at first, but the moment I found that surveillance room, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. I went in on a Thursday night around 11 p.m., parked my car about 2 blocks away in case anyone was watching the area. I had my lockpick set, flashlight, camera, the usual gear I carry for this kind of work. The factory had a side entrance with an old padlock that took me maybe 90 seconds to pick. Honestly, it was almost too easy, which should have been my first red flag. Inside, the place was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned building. Dust everywhere, broken windows, graffiti on the walls, pigeons roosting in the rafters. I moved through the main floor carefully, checking each room with my flashlight. Most of it was just empty space where machinery used to be, nothing interesting. But then I found a stairwell leading down to what must have been a basement level. The door at the bottom was newer than everything else, solid metal with a decent lock on it. That got my attention real quick. I spent about 5 minutes working on that lock before it finally clicked open. When I pushed the door, it swung smooth and quiet on oiled hinges, another thing that didn't fit with an abandoned building. I stepped into a hallway that was clean, no dust, and I could hear this faint humming sound like electronics running. That's when my instincts started screaming at me to get the hell out, but I'd come this far and I needed to see what was down there. I followed the hallway to another door, this one unlocked, and opened it into what I can only describe as a professional surveillance operations center. What I saw in that room made my blood run cold. This wasn't a criminal hideout. It was a trap specifically designed to lure people like me. The room was maybe 20 by 20 feet, filled with equipment that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking server racks, multiple computer workstations, and a whole wall of monitors showing different camera feeds. Most of the monitors were dark, but a few were displaying live footage, street views, building interiors, parking lots. I recognized some of the locations from around Scranton. The setup was professional, military-grade stuff, way beyond what some small-time money launderers would have. I was standing there trying to process what I was looking at when I noticed the chair in the center of the room. There was a mannequin sitting in it, dressed in a long coat and hat, positioned like it was watching the monitors. Something about that mannequin gave me serious creeps. It was too deliberate, too staged. Then I saw the tablet on the desk next to it, screen glowing in the dim light. I picked it up and saw it was playing a video on loop. The video showed my car pulling up to the curb 2 blocks away, showed me getting out and walking toward the factory, showed me picking the side entrance lock, showed me moving through the building with my flashlight. They'd been recording me since the moment I arrived, probably had cameras I never even spotted. My hands started shaking as I realized I'd been set up from the very beginning. The message on that tablet confirmed my worst fear. I wasn't investigating them, they were studying me, and I'd given them exactly what they wanted. I tapped the screen to see if there was anything else, and a login screen appeared with a message in white text. Welcome, P.I. Vance. We recorded your entry method and estimated time on target. Thank you for your cooperation in improving our security protocols. I just stared at that message for probably 10 seconds, feeling my heart hammering in my chest. This whole thing, the anonymous tip, the fake money laundering story, the easy access, it was all designed to lure me here, so they could study how a private investigator operates. They wanted to see my techniques, my timing, my equipment, also they could improve their own security measures against people like me. I'd basically given them a free tutorial on investigative tactics. The really terrifying part was how professional this was. This wasn't some amateur operation or paranoid conspiracy theorists setting traps. This was organized, well-funded, and clearly being run by people with serious resources and training. I immediately thought about all my active cases, all my clients, all the investigations I'd been running. Had I been compromised on those too? Were they watching me on other jobs? How long had they been tracking me? I dropped the tablet back on the desk and started backing toward the door, keeping my eyes on those monitors like they might suddenly show more people coming to grab me. I needed to get out of there immediately, but I also knew I had to be smart about it because they were obviously still watching. Getting out of that building was the longest 10 minutes of my life, and what I discovered afterward was even more disturbing than what I'd found inside. I forced myself to move carefully back through the hallway and up the stairs, trying not to run, even though every instinct was screaming at me to sprint for the exit. I figured if they wanted to grab me, they would have done it already, so maybe they were just content to let me leave now that they'd gotten what they wanted. When I got back outside, I didn't go straight to my car. Instead, I circled around a few blocks, checking constantly to see if anyone was following me. It took me about 20 minutes of paranoid walking before I finally got back to my vehicle and drove home, checking my rearview mirror the whole way. That night I barely slept, kept thinking about that surveillance room and what it all meant. The next morning I started digging, trying to figure out who might have set this up. I checked property records for the factory, owned by a shell company registered in Delaware. I tried to trace the email that sent me the tip, bounced through multiple proxy servers, totally untraceable. I even reached out to some contacts I have in law enforcement, asked if they'd heard anything about sophisticated surveillance operations in the area. Nobody knew anything, or if they did, they weren't telling me. Then I started noticing things around my office and my apartment, little signs that someone had been there. Books on my shelf slightly out of order, my filing cabinet lock scratched like someone had picked it, my laptop showing activity while I was supposed to be asleep. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They wanted me to know they could reach me whenever they wanted. I shut down my entire practice and left Pennsylvania because I realized I'd stumbled onto something much bigger and more dangerous than I ever imagined, and I'm still looking over my shoulder every single day. After about a week of noticing the surveillance signs, I got another email from the same anonymous sender. All it said was, "Your operational security needs improvement, Mr. Vance. Consider this a professional courtesy warning." That's when I made the decision to completely shut down my business. I told my clients I was retiring due to health issues, packed up my office, and moved out of state to stay with my sister in Colorado. I know it sounds extreme, maybe even paranoid, but you have to understand, whoever these people are, they have resources and capabilities that go way beyond anything I've ever encountered. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that factory wasn't just about studying me. It was about studying investigative techniques in general, probably from multiple PIs and maybe even law enforcement who'd been lured there the same way I was. They were building a database of tactics and methods so they could stay ahead of anyone who might investigate them. The FBI wasn't interested when I tried to report it, said I didn't have enough concrete evidence of a crime and that trespassing in an abandoned building wasn't their jurisdiction. So now I'm living in Denver, doing construction work under my sister's boyfriend, trying to build a normal life that doesn't involve surveillance cameras and anonymous threats. But I still check my car for GPS trackers every few days. I still cover my laptop camera with tape, and I still won't use the same route to work twice in a row. Because I know they're out there, whoever they are, and I know they're still watching. Sometimes I wonder if that email was really a warning, or if it was just another way to keep me scared and off balance. Either way, it worked. I gave up everything I'd built over 16 years because of one mistake, walking into that factory when I should have known better. And the worst part, I still don't know who they are or what they're really doing. I just know they're professionals, they're dangerous, and they wanted me to know that I'm completely outmatched. That's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone, and it's a feeling I'll probably carry with me for the rest of my life. I tore down a wall in a new house and found a hidden room full of servers, and what was on those screens made me realize we'd stumbled onto a human trafficking hub that was expanding into something even more horrifying. Look, I've been working construction for 22 years, started as a laborer right out of high school, and worked my way up to foreman. I run crews now, mostly residential builds in the Portland area, where there's been this massive housing boom for the past 5 years or so. We build these cookie-cutter subdivisions, 3 or 4 different floor plans, pump out houses as fast as we can frame them. It's good money, but it's repetitive work, you know? Same thing day after day, nothing surprising. So when I got called to this house we'd finished about 2 weeks earlier because the new owners were complaining about a weird metallic smell coming from the basement, I figured it was just some HVAC issue or maybe a plumbing leak. Happens all the time in new construction. Something gets installed wrong, needs a quick fix, no big deal. I grabbed 2 guys from my crew, Tommy and Miguel, and we headed over there on a Thursday morning. The house was in the Meadowbrook development, one of our standard 3-bedroom models, looked perfect from the outside. The owners, this young couple with a baby on the way, met us at the door looking really worried. They said the smell had been getting stronger over the past few days, especially in the basement, and they were concerned about mold or something toxic. I told them we'd figure it out, not to worry. Famous last words, right? When we got down to that basement, everything looked normal at first, but the more we investigated, the more wrong details we started noticing. We went down the basement stairs, and yeah, there was definitely a smell. Sort of metallic and electronic, like when you open up a computer that's been running hot for too long. The basement was supposed to be just an empty storage space with concrete floors and unfinished walls, standard setup for this model. But the smell was concentrated near the back corner, and when I got close to that wall, I noticed something odd. The drywall didn't quite match the rest of the basement, different texture, slightly different color, like it had been installed later or by someone else. I knocked on it and it sounded hollow, which was weird because there shouldn't be any empty space back there according to the blueprints. The wall also felt warm to the touch, like there was heat coming from behind it. I told Tommy to grab the reciprocating saw from the truck because we needed to cut through and see what was going on back there. The homeowners were standing at the top of the stairs watching us, getting more nervous by the minute. I reassured them we'd figure it out, but honestly I was starting to get a bad feeling myself. Tommy cut a small inspection hole first, and immediately more of that smell came pouring out, along with a noticeable temperature difference. It was way cooler behind that wall than in the rest of the basement. I shined my flashlight through the hole and saw what looked like metal shelving or racks. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong, because there was nothing in our construction plans about any kind of built-in storage back there. We tore down that entire false wall, and what we found hidden behind it was like something out of a nightmare, a secret room that wasn't supposed to exist. I made the call to just demolish the whole false wall, so we could see what we were dealing with. It took us about 20 minutes to rip all that drywall down, and behind it was a steel door with a keypad lock. A keypad lock in a brand new house's basement, hidden behind a fake wall. None of this was in our blueprints, none of it was part of the build we'd done. I tried the door, and it was unlocked, which seemed odd for something someone had gone through so much trouble to hide. The second we opened it, we got hit with a blast of cold air. There was serious climate control happening in there. The room was maybe 20 by 20 feet, concrete walls that were way thicker than standard construction, and it was filled with server racks. I'm talking dozens of black metal racks with blinking lights, Ethernet cables everywhere, the whole setup humming with electricity. This was a professional data center installation, probably cost $100,000 or more in equipment. Miguel pulled out his phone to call the cops right away, but I told him to wait a second because I wanted to understand what we were looking at first. Some of the monitors attached to the servers were still on, displaying what looked like some kind of website or database interface. I'm not a tech guy, but I know enough to recognize when something looks illegal, and this definitely looked illegal. The interface had listings with photos, descriptions, prices. It looked like an auction site, but what was being auctioned made my stomach drop. The files on those servers revealed a human trafficking operation so organized and sophisticated that I literally felt sick reading through them. I started looking closer at what was displayed on the screens, and that's when the full horror of what we'd found really hit me. These weren't listings for products or services, they were listings for people. Mostly women, some men, even some teenagers, each with detailed profiles that included physical descriptions, psychological assessments, something called vulnerability scores, and current health status updates. The language was cold and clinical, like they were describing livestock or merchandise rather than human beings. Terms like compliant, requires additional conditioning, ready for transfer, stuff that made it clear these were trafficking victims being sold to the highest bidder. There were hundreds of profiles in this database, maybe thousands, I couldn't tell. Some had photos that looked like they'd been taken secretly. Others had what looked like mugshot-style pictures taken in plain rooms. Each profile had a bidding history showing amounts ranging from a few $1,000s to over $50,000 for certain premium listings. I felt Tommy standing behind me breathing hard, and when I looked at him his face had gone completely white. Miguel was already on his phone calling 911, explaining to the dispatcher that we'd found evidence of human trafficking. I kept scrolling through the interface, looking for any information about who was running this operation or where these victims were being held. That's when I noticed one monitor off to the side that was showing a live video feed, and what I saw on that screen made everything 10 times worse. The live camera feed showed a nursery and a daycare center, and the caption underneath made me realize they were planning to expand their operation to include children. The monitor was displaying what was clearly a security camera view of a children's nursery. You could see cribs, colorful wall decorations, toys scattered around, the whole setup. It looked like a daycare center, or maybe a hospital nursery, somewhere with multiple infants and toddlers. The camera angle suggested it was hidden, maybe installed in a smoke detector or ventilation grate, positioned to capture the whole room without being obvious. And at the bottom of the screen was a text overlay that said, "New demographic research successful. Expanding collection targets." I just stared at that screen trying to process what I was reading. Collection targets. They were talking about babies and young children, like they were items to be collected. This trafficking operation wasn't just targeting vulnerable adults anymore. They were researching how to abduct children from daycare centers. The technical sophistication of this whole setup the hidden room, the servers, the auction platform. It all pointed to a large-scale, organized operation with serious funding and expertise. This wasn't some amateur criminals working out of a van. This was a network with resources, with technical capabilities, with the ability to hide servers in new construction homes that nobody would think to look for. I told Miguel to tell the 911 dispatcher we needed FBI here immediately, that this was way bigger than local police could handle. The homeowners were understandably freaking out, asking what was in their basement, and I honestly didn't know what to tell them. The FBI investigation that followed uncovered a trafficking network spanning 6 states. But what keeps me up at night is knowing there are probably more of these hidden server rooms we haven't found yet. The FBI showed up within 45 minutes with a whole team of agents and digital forensics specialists. They basically took over the entire house, set up a perimeter, started pulling data off those servers immediately. We gave our statements, and then they told us we couldn't talk about what we'd found with anyone until the investigation was complete. This was now an active federal case. Turns out the house had been purchased 6 months earlier under a shell company, and someone had paid one of the subcontractors on our build to install that hidden room and server setup without it appearing on any official plans or inspections. The actual buyers, the young couple who'd reported the smell, had no idea what was in their basement and were just innocent victims of this whole thing. The FBI eventually told me, after months of investigation, that the servers we found were part of a trafficking network operating across Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, Idaho, and Montana. They'd been using newly constructed homes in developing subdivisions as server locations because nobody would think to look there. Houses are being built constantly. Inspectors are overwhelmed and miss details, and by the time anyone moves in the operation can just abandon that location and set up somewhere else. They arrested 17 people connected to the network, shut down 4 other server locations they found through the data, and rescued over 30 victims who were being held in various locations. But here's what haunts me. The FBI said they only found about 40% of the network's infrastructure. There are still servers out there, still hidden rooms in newly built houses, still people being trafficked through the system. And that daycare camera feed? They never found which facility it was, never identified where those children were. The investigation is still ongoing, but nobody's been able to track down that location. So now every time I'm on a construction site, I'm looking for things that don't match the blueprints, wall sections that seem off, spaces that don't make sense. My crew thinks I've gotten paranoid, but I can't shake the feeling that we might build right over another one of these rooms without knowing it. I've reported 3 suspicious installations to the FBI in the past 6 months. All turned out to be nothing, just normal construction irregularities. But I'd rather call in false alarms than miss another trafficking hub hiding in plain sight. I discovered that my own sheriff, the man who trained me, who I looked up to like a father, was selling out the people we swore to protect to a human trafficking ring. My name's Frank Carter, and I've been a deputy sheriff in Madison County, upstate New York, for about 7 years now. It's a rural county, population maybe 15,000 spread across a huge area of farmland and small towns where everybody knows everybody. When I joined the department right out of the academy, Sheriff Ben Harding took me under his wing, showed me the ropes, taught me how to do real community policing. He'd been sheriff for almost 30 years, knew every family in the county, attended every town hall meeting, always talked about how our job was to protect the vulnerable and the isolated. He was old school in the best way, believed in integrity, in doing things right, in building trust with the community. I genuinely looked up to the man like he was my own father, especially since my dad passed when I was in high school. Sheriff Harding became that mentor figure for me, and I would have trusted him with my life. Hell, I did trust him with my life every single day out on patrol. So when I started noticing inconsistencies in our case files about 3 months ago, my first instinct wasn't suspicion. It was concern that maybe he was getting old, making mistakes, needing help he was too proud to ask for. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was, how blind loyalty can make you miss things that should have been obvious. But at the time, I just wanted to help my mentor, not investigate him. It started with an elderly farmer named Harold Brennan going missing, and the way Sheriff Harding handled it made alarm bells go off in my head for the first time ever. Harold Brennan was 73 years old, lived alone on a 200-acre farm about 15 miles outside town. Nice guy, kept to himself mostly since his wife died a few years back, but he'd come into town every Saturday for supplies and coffee at the diner. When he didn't show up 3 Saturdays in a row, The diner owner called it in as a welfare check. I took the call and drove out to his property, found his truck in the driveway, front door unlocked, but no sign of Harold anywhere. His wallet was on the kitchen counter, phone was there too, medication bottles were full like he hadn't taken his prescriptions in days. Everything pointed to him not leaving voluntarily. I called it in as a possible missing person, got Sheriff Harding on the radio, and expected him to mobilize a search party like we'd done for other missing folks. But instead he just said over the radio, real casual, Harold probably just decided to move in with one of his kids. You know how these old farmers get. File it as voluntary departure. We'll follow up in a few days. That response didn't sit right with me because I knew for a fact Harold's only son lived in California, and they barely spoke. I pushed back a little, said we should at least do a proper investigation, and Harding got this edge in his voice I'd never heard before. He told me to follow orders and not waste department resources on someone who clearly left on their own. Something about the way he said it made my gut twist. That was the first time in 7 years I questioned my sheriff's judgment. I started digging through old case files and found a pattern that made my blood run cold. 3 other people had vanished under similar circumstances, and Harding had dismissed every single case. I couldn't let the Harold Brennan thing go, so I started looking through our records for other missing person cases over the past 2 years. What I found was disturbing as hell. There were 3 other disappearances that fit almost the exact same pattern. Elderly or middle-aged people living alone in isolated rural properties, no family nearby, last seen at predictable times and places, vanished without taking personal belongings or vehicles. And in every single case, Sheriff Harding had closed the file as voluntary departure or relocated out of county without any real investigation. No interviews with neighbors, no searches of the properties, nothing. For a guy who always preached about protecting the vulnerable, he sure seemed eager to write off vulnerable people disappearing. I pulled the GPS logs from our patrol vehicles for the dates around these disappearances, which is something we're technically not supposed to access without authorization, but I did it anyway because something was seriously wrong here. Standard procedure is that all our vehicles have GPS trackers that log our locations for liability and coordination purposes. When I looked at Sheriff Harding's vehicle logs for the nights before each disappearance, I noticed something strange. His patrol car was parked for 3 to 5 hours at a time in an area called Blackwell Ridge, which is this remote section of county land that's basically just forest and old logging roads. Blackwell Ridge is known among deputies as a dead zone. No cell service, no radio coverage. You're basically off the grid out there. Why would our sheriff be parking out there for hours during his shift? It made no sense unless he didn't want anyone to know what he was doing. When I hacked into our department's computer system, what I found in those encrypted files destroyed everything I thought I knew about the man I'd trusted for 7 years. I need to be honest here. What I did next was completely illegal and could have gotten me fired and probably arrested. But I felt like I was going crazy with these suspicions, and I needed to know the truth. I waited until I had a late shift when the office was mostly empty, and I used Sheriff Harding's login credentials that I'd seen him type in 100 times to access the department's internal computer system. I went through his email, his case files, his personal folders, looking for anything that would explain the GPS logs and the dismissed missing person cases. Most of it was routine administrative stuff, but then I found a folder labeled External Coordination that was encrypted with a password. It took me about 2 hours of trying different combinations before I got in. The password was his wife's maiden name and their anniversary year, typical boomer security. Inside that folder were communications that made me physically sick to read. Sheriff Harding was in regular contact with someone using an encrypted messaging service, and they were discussing delivery schedules, patrol route modifications, isolation windows, and target assessments. The messages went back almost 3 years and included detailed information about our department's patrol schedules, which deputies were assigned to which areas, and most horrifying, personal information about elderly residents living alone. Harold Brennan's name was in there, along with the other 3 missing people. The messages made it clear that Harding was providing intelligence to some kind of organized criminal network, helping them identify vulnerable targets, and ensuring they'd have uninterrupted access by keeping deputies away from certain areas at specific times. The moment I realized Sheriff Harding had been giving my patrol routes to traffickers was the moment I understood I'd been a pawn in something evil for years. As I kept reading through those files, I found something that made my hands start shaking so bad I could barely hold the mouse. There was a document titled Deputy Route Analysis, that contained detailed schedules for every deputy in our department, including me. It showed our typical patrol patterns, the times we'd be in specific areas, where we'd usually stop for breaks, even personal information, like which of us had families at home waiting versus which of us lived alone. My route was listed there with notes like predictable timing, usually isolated between 2200 to 2400, minimal backup available in sectors 4 to 7. They'd been studying us, learning our habits, and Sheriff Harding had been feeding them this information. I realized that every time I'd been out on patrol feeling safe because I trusted my department, I'd actually been a potential target for whatever operation Harding was facilitating. Or worse, I'd been kept away from areas where crimes were happening, so I wouldn't accidentally discover anything. All those nights I drove past isolated farms and rural properties, thinking I was protecting people. Some of those people were probably being abducted while I was deliberately routed elsewhere. The man I'd trusted like a father had been using me and every other deputy as pawns, exploiting our loyalty and our patterns to help criminals operate in our own county. The betrayal felt worse than if he'd just punched me in the face. This was a violation of everything law enforcement is supposed to stand for. I'm in witness protection now, my career is over, and 3 more bodies have been found. But at least I stopped trusting the wrong people and started trusting my gut before it was too late. I copied everything I found onto a thumb drive, sent an encrypted email to the FBI field office in Albany, and waited in my car outside the sheriff's office until federal agents arrived 6 hours later. I didn't trust anyone in my department at that point, didn't know who else might be involved, who else Harding might have corrupted. When the FBI finally showed up and I handed over the evidence, they immediately placed me in protective custody and launched a massive investigation. Turns out Sheriff Harding was what they call a facilitator, basically a corrupt official who helps trafficking networks operate by providing inside information and ensuring law enforcement doesn't interfere. The network he was working with operated across 4 states and had been responsible for at least 19 abductions that they could confirm, including our 4 missing people. They found Harold Brennan's body 3 weeks ago in a shallow grave about 40 miles from Blackwell Ridge, along with 2 others. 1 person is still missing and probably dead. Sheriff Harding was arrested along with 6 other people connected to the trafficking operation, including 1 other deputy from our department that I'd worked alongside for years. The trial's scheduled for next year. As for me, I'm living under a different name in a different state, can't work in law enforcement anymore, can't contact my friends or what little family I have. The FBI says the network had a history of retaliating against whistleblowers, so I'm basically stuck in this weird limbo existence until after the trials are over. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking about all the times I drove past a farm where someone might have been being abducted, all the times I followed patrol routes that had been deliberately designed to keep me away from crimes in progress. I think about Harold Brennan and how I might have saved him if I'd questioned Harding sooner, if I'd trusted my instincts instead of my loyalty. The lesson I learned, and I hope someone out there hears this, is that you can't let respect for authority blind you to obvious warning signs. Evil doesn't always look like a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it looks like your mentor, your boss, someone you'd trust with your life. And if something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, even if the person involved is someone you admire. Trust your gut, document everything, and don't be afraid to go over someone's head when lives might be at stake. Because I waited too long and people died, I have to live with that forever.